Welcome to Mystery Chronicles, where we dive deep into some of the most intriguing and mysterious stories from around the world. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I had been looking forward to it so much. The French countryside, French food, visiting a real French farm. I had started practicing French, since I started dating Nicholas, but as our long-promised trip grew nearer with renewed fervor, and finally we were here. Everything so far had been up to expectation. The 2 nights in Paris, the sightseeing, the train rides, and now at the farm. It was my first trip to Europe, and I drank everything in with delight. Nicholas had been more restrained, putting on a worldly look, which rather annoyed me. But as the train got closer to the little town closest to his grandparents' place, he seemed to mellow out. As indeed he should have been. The fields were like postcards. We arrived late afternoon, and Grand-père took us out on a little tour of his land. The setting sun hit the lush green vegetable gardens just right, and the frothy leaves lit up in jade and emerald.
You're not going to get flavors like these in America. Only McDonald's there.
His pastoral accent was heavier than what I had noticed from a few video calls we had, and I smiled politely. Despite my valiant efforts to learn French before our trip, I could pick up only the rough sense of what he was saying. I stole a glance at Nicholas. He was suppressing the urge to roll his eyes and correct his grandfather that he lived in Canada. It was a timeless dance, as he had described to me since his childhood, when he used to spend summers at the farm with them. Grandfather bashed Americans and waxed lyrical about French fruits and vegetables, and Nicholas nodded, counting the days he could leave. He had decided at an early age that he refused to make the superiority of French turnips his identity. But the food was amazing, right? Holding my hand, we followed Grand-père into the ancient stone farmhouse, where the French feast of pot-au-feu with those amazing farm-grown vegetables, crusty baguettes, and red wine awaited us, just as their ancestors would have it. But Grand-père was angry as we spread bone marrow on the torn bread, flavored only with salt and just a touch of horseradish. He ranted about government subsidies. I could see from Nicholas's slight frown that even he had difficulty following his grandfather's French, filled with farming jargon.
We will show them. Our tractors blocked the country last year. We need more fertilizer, du sang noir. Traitors in Paris telling us how much should be using. What do they know about our vegetables? Only 100 kilos this year. Are you fucking kidding me? I said to the association. Just my leeks need 45 kilos d'engrais noir. I can't miss the season. Already too late.
My brain twitched.
Are you sure you drink wine?
I nodded.
She drinks wine?
Nicholas grabbed the wine bottle and poured for me, and I gratefully took a huge sip. Grand-mère looked scandalized. I reminded myself there was a good reason why Nicholas had insisted we only stay for a night. Grand-père stopped ranting and turned to me. Unable to bear his blue gaze, I cast my eyes down on my plate of boiled vegetables. He reached out his thick, work-worn hand and lightly touched my cheek. I flinched. It felt as though he had struck me.
Assez noir.
My eyes grew wide as uncertainty, offense, and fear filled my heart. I say, what now? I turned to Nicola, telegraphing a little panic. He looked at Grand-mère, who was loudly chewing a bit of gristle.
Can we go to our room?
Of course, mes petits. Come, all that travel.
After she showed us the room, the same room Nicholas had spent his summers in, she left us, smiling and saying, Bonsoir. Grand-mère. As Grand-mère. Bonsoir. We sat side by side on the bed, not saying anything. I felt discombobulated by the travel, the language, and the comments. After a while, we got up. It was dark. His grandparents would have gone to bed, we were sure. We slowly went back downstairs to fetch our suitcases. A scraping sound wafted up the stairs. His grandparents weren't in bed. Scrape, scrape. A dim light spilled from the kitchen, and we both saw Grand-père sharpening a knife. Grand-père as Grand-père. Scraping sound. Without needing to say a word, we turned, dashed back upstairs. We grabbed our backpacks and slid out into the hallway. It seemed like suddenly a switch had turned on in my brain and I could perfectly understand what he said. He took a step up. Nicholas stepped in front of me and we both clattered down towards him. I screamed as a pair of hands shoved me from behind and I started falling towards Grand-père's sharp knife. Twisting my neck, I saw Grand-mère above me. She didn't follow us down. Nicholas swung his backpack as I fell against him. Grand-père grunted as it caught the side of his head. As he stumbled and fell off balance, Nicholas swung again, and we were able to dash by him and run to the door. Fiddling with the heavy locked door seemed to take an eternity. Grand-père stood up and lunged towards us. I deflected him with another swing of the backpack, and finally, Nicholas was able to shove the door open. We ran out into the warm dark, heavily scented with the smell of flourishing vegetables. Running towards the road. I looked back. The silhouettes of Grand-père and Grand-mère stood backlit in the doorway, as still as a painting. They made no attempt to chase us, just stood there, watching, as we ran down, away, and towards the town. The confession. At the age of 17, I watched my father slaughter my whole family. I have kept quiet until now, because everything surrounding this story is becoming foggy in my aging mind. I feel like I need to tell someone, anyone, before the jaws of death sink their teeth into my broken frame. I remember the night so well, even after 75 years. It exists like a cancer on the walls of my psyche, tormenting me. Soft bullets of rain pelted my body as I was sulking home from a particularly horrid day of baseball practice. After waiting for my father for nearly an hour, an annoyance crescendoed inside of me. I gave up my waiting, opting to just angrily walk home in the pouring rain. My house was only a short distance from the school I was enrolled in at the time, so I ended up only having to walk for about 15 minutes or so. as I approached the iron gate that cut off my house from the rest of the world. Warning signals began firing off in my brain. Something primal within me told me to turn around. All the lights were off, their absence blanketing the house in an eerie darkness under the clouded sky. The dozens of windows, usually lit up with life, now felt cold and empty. I unlocked the gate and pushed open the iron bars, something that normally protected the house from unwanted guests, now felt as if it was keeping something locked away inside. The short path that led up to the entrance of the house felt like it stretched on for miles, and I took wavering steps. My mind began to race, trying to rationalize my growing dread. The power had simply gone out, a result of the harsh weather outside. I'd open the door and see my family huddled around a lit candle, mingling as they came up with a solution. I pushed open the door slowly, a wail coming from its hinges. I shut it behind me and sat my bag next to the coat rack in the corner. The tension in the air surrounded me from all angles, smothering me. I drew my gaze across the entryway, 2 openings on either side that led to the rest of the house. They sat there like black pools. Anything could be hiding from me inside their ink. Drawing my gaze back to the middle of the room, I paused at the stairway ascending to the second floor of the house. I could only see up a few steps before darkness swallowed them up. After what felt like hours, I spoke, my words breaking through the silent film in the air. Dad? For a moment, my distress signal was met with more unwelcoming silence. But in one fell swoop, the silence that the house lay in would be burnt up by a loud bang which echoed from the top of the stairs. It rang through my ears, reverberating off the walls of my ear canal. Shortly after, something came barreling down the stairs towards me. A stifled scream failed to leave my throat, and I threw my arms up, trying to shield myself from whatever hurled itself at me. But then, nothing. I lowered my trembling arms and saw something at the bottom of the stairs. Despite my vision never failing me before, the mass was blurry and intangible, as if I was seeing it out of my peripherals. Despite that, I could tell by the vague shape that it was human. They lay there, unmoving, face pressed to the floor, with broken limbs, pointed in unnatural directions. As I took weary steps towards the contorted mass, they still remained a blur in my vision. I could tell it was a younger woman, but she looked nothing like my mother. The woman on the floor had jet black hair, and she wore a pink dress with black tassels lining the bottom. I brought my hand to touch her back. She felt warm. As I got closer, I could hear her labored breathing. Just then, the same noise from earlier once again broke through the quiet air. A loud bang, followed quickly by a quick flash of light at the top of the staircase. Then came a loud thud. I quickly turned my gaze upwards and into the dark void. I watched and waited for what seemed like hours. When the ringing subsided, I heard quick footsteps dash across the hallway. A pained, sorrow-filled yell came soon after, echoing across the hall and down the stairs towards me. Dale Hardy. No. Dear God, please no. Ignoring whatever or whoever lay at the bottom of the stairs, I ran up and into the darkness, nearly tripping over each step. The hallway at the top of the stairs was pitch black. I heard a man sobbing to my left. As my eyes began to adjust, I saw a vague outline of something crouched over on the floor. I raised my hand to the light switch on the wall, slowly flipping on the overhead lights. There, I saw my father on his knees, shotgun on the floor next to him. Both of them sat in a pool of blood. My mother lay in his arms, shaking as he did. A grisly visage was staring at me from where her head lay on my father's shoulder. Staring into her glossy eyes told me all I needed to know. What stared at me was no longer my mother, but simply the shell her soul once inhabited. She had a large gap where her stomach used to be. Blood and other organs began to seep through, falling apart with the loss of structure from her torso. Blood spread like a virus, coating everything in a dark, disgusting hue. My father was blocking most of the unsightly imagery, but I saw enough. As for my baby sister, God, I can't even describe the state she was in. I will never be able to erase it from my mind. He turned his head slowly to face me. Tears fell like waterfalls from my father's tired eyes. Their blood had spattered onto his face, mixing together in a macabre painting. Snot hung from his nose, while spit flew from his mouth with each wailing cry. The more he clung to my mother's body, Dale Hardy, Hunter, my sweet boy, this. He began to shout at me, his voice hitching in his throat with each word. The rest of the night was a blur. I faintly remember running for what seemed like hours, bawling my eyes out to some officer I found on patrol, and recounting my story to him. I was soon shoved into an orphanage, having no other family to care for me. After a few days, my anger sprouted a growth of confusion. So many things didn't make sense to me. We met at the dividing glass of the visitors area. He wore the standard orange jumpsuit, which was dirty and contained a few spots of dried blood. He was a complete mess, unkempt and broken. I could even smell the lingering stench of death through the glass. He had the eyes of a man who had lived 1,000 lifetimes. Before he could utter a single word, I assaulted him with a demand. Hunter, tell me how it happened. Soft tears fell down his face as he continued. Dale Hardy. After that, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I burst open the door and I saw her, standing there, facing me. Even in the dark, I could tell that it wasn't your mother. I shot her as well. She fell with a loud crack, sliding down the stairs. If the shot didn't kill her, the fall certainly did. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw... He began to cry harder as he covered his face in his withering hands. He didn't continue after that. Rather, I didn't stay to listen to it anymore. I pushed myself away from the booth and walked out of that horrid place, his pained cries slowly disappearing behind me. I never saw my father again. I let him rot in that prison. Yesterday I was sitting in my study when a wave of traumatic nostalgia washed across me. For the first time in decades, I decided to search up my father's name to see what fate became of him in that rancid cell, but there was nothing. I tried searching more specifically. Dale Hardy, baseball, star, murders, Hardy, family murders, Dale Hardy murder case. Not a single result came up. I didn't even see his face. I spent hours trying to find something, anything. But still, nothing came up. I may be old, but I'm not crazy. I know my father was real. That what I witnessed that day is real. It was a crisp Halloween night, and Margot had the house all to herself. A stack of textbooks sat untouched on the kitchen table, the lamp's soft glow casting long shadows on the walls. Margot, 18, and a first-year college student, had never been one for parties. The allure of studying for her exams outweighed any trick-or-treating or costume festivities her classmates might enjoy. Tonight, her focus was on an easy babysitting gig for a couple who had gone out for the evening. Sean, the 1.5-year-old she was looking after, had been an angel all night. His giggles filled the air, his big blue eyes sparkling like stars. Margot had already tucked him into bed, his tiny form nestled under a blanket adorned with cartoon animals. She settled onto the couch, the warm glow from the TV barely lighting the room. Margot didn't mind the silence. In fact, she liked it. The quiet was her companion, especially since she didn't quite have friends to fill the space. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table, but she ignored it. Instead, she focused on the soft sound of the baby monitor beside her. It was comforting, knowing that if Sean stirred or needed anything, she'd hear it immediately. The clock ticked on. A few minutes later, something caught her attention. It was faint at first, a whisper. She furrowed her brow, leaning closer to the monitor. There it was again. A voice. Margot, come here. It's time. Margot's heart skipped. The baby, Sean, had been sound asleep. There was no reason for anyone to be talking through the monitor. She glanced toward the hallway, but everything looked normal. She hesitated. Maybe it was just static, or perhaps the wind messing with the signal. She shook it off, but the voice came again, clearer this time. Hey lady, you're too late. Her stomach churned. She stood up slowly, her instincts telling her to check on Sean. What was going on? The house felt unnervingly still. She walked to the nursery door and paused, listening. No sound came from the monitor now, just a faint crackling. She took a breath and pushed the door open. The room was bathed in dim light, and there, in the crib, was Sean. He was still asleep, a small smile curling on his face as he dreamed. Relieved, Margot exhaled. But as she turned to leave, the voice crackled through the monitor again, but this time it was loud, angry. Leave him alone. He's mine. Margot froze. That was not Sean. Her heart began to pound as she slowly backed away from the crib. She glanced nervously at the monitor, but the voice kept coming. It was distorted, eerie, and mocking. A sudden shiver ran down her spine. Voice, V-O, go. Go now. Margot's legs trembled, and she felt a chill spread through her body. She turned to leave, but the footsteps came next, loud and fast, pacing just behind her. Her breath quickened, but when she reached the door, something made her glance over her shoulder. There was nothing there, but the whispers, the low, sinister whispers, kept growing louder. Voice. VO. Don't leave yet. Her heart pounded in her chest. She sprinted out of the room, the baby monitor's static now blaring in her ears, the whispers turning into full, distorted words. Voice. VO. You can't leave. You're mine. She heard the voice one last time as she reached the top of the stairs, and it screamed in her ear. Voice, get out of my house. Margot gasped and stumbled, her foot catching on the top step. Time seemed to slow as she toppled forward, her body twisting in midair. The stairs loomed like jagged teeth as she fell, the ground rushing up to meet her. There was a sickening crack, and everything went dark. Hours later, the flashing red and blue lights of a police car illuminated the quiet street. Officers were gathered at the foot of the stairs, one of them talking quietly into his radio. A man in a coat stood nearby, his eyes red and swollen from crying. The officer paused, glancing down at the baby monitor, still lying on the floor near the stairs, the static barely audible. Officer. Strangest thing, turns out it was picking up a radio signal from some old horror radio show. It's been glitching all night, playing voices and static. Maybe that's what spooked her. He paused again and looked up, glancing at the baby, still peacefully sleeping in his crib. The officer took one last look at the baby monitor. The voice, the whispers, it all made sense now. Officer, just a glitch in the system, but there was something unsettling about the way the static crackled again, as if someone or something was still trying to speak.